Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Turner, and I'm chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to welcome all of y'all to the Franchise 101 event. And I want to thank all of you for being here this morning, and I'd also like to give a special thanks to Aspire of Clarksville, and also to, who's our sponsor today, and also to CDE for broadcasting this for us this morning. When we were looking at doing events this year for the Chamber, we really wanted to do something that appealed to the entrepreneurs in our Chamber as well as the entrepreneurs in this community. And if you're interested in starting a business, a franchise is a great opportunity to do that. And today we have somebody here with us this morning that has 25 years of experience in pairing interested individuals with successful franchise companies. And Rick started Franchise Coach 25 years ago, and he is consistently recognized as one of the most successful franchise consultants in the United States. Previously, he's been the Director of International Franchise Development for AFC Enterprises, which consists of Popeye's Chicken, Church's Chicken, Cinnabon, and Seattle's Best Coffee. He has placed these brands in more than 30 countries. Rich has also owned both franchise and non-franchise businesses, and he has bought, sold, and invested in many businesses and worked with advisors to seek others seeking to do the same. He is a best-selling author and a regular speaker on the subject of business ownership and franchising. Rick currently lives on a small resort island in Florida with his family, and I'm honored to introduce and welcome franchise coach Rick Bisio.
Thank you very much. Kind introduction. I want to say thank you, first of all, to Phil and to Melinda and to Paul for inviting me here. I had been to Nashville many times, had never been to Clarksville. What a neat little place you have here. Phil gave me a tour. If he decides to stop working for the Chamber, he could be a tour guide. He knows everything about everything in this town, and I almost feel like a native now after listening to him for a little bit. But truly a beautiful place, so thank you for having me. Move that to the side a little bit here. So I've been a franchise coach, as you said, for 20 years now, and I usually work with individuals who want to become franchisees. This is a little bit of a different audience, right? Because some of you might want to become franchisors, some of you might want to become franchisees, some of you might be vendors and maybe want to vend to the franchising sector, and some are just curious. So we're trying to create a little bit of a wider presentation today that covers a number of different topics. I like to keep this conversational, so I'm going to ask questions and probably solicit your answers. If you have a question, put your hand up, yell, let me know, all right? You don't have to wait to the end to ask your questions. I'm going to try to keep the comments to about 45 minutes, which will leave us time for discussion on topics that you may want to discuss. So, as far as what we're going to talk about today, we're going to start out with basically three different things. We're going to talk about foundational information. What I have found over the years is a lot of people don't really understand what franchising is foundationally, really fundamentally. So we're going to start with that. We're going to then go in to talk about the data and the trends that we see in franchising on a national basis in the Nashville metro area and even a little bit here in Clarksville, which I think will be helpful to you to understand kind of the size and scope and what we really see out there today. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how franchising competes in what we have as a very competitive world today and how it actually continues to survive and prosper over the last 70 years. So I'm going to start out with two easy questions. First question for you is franchising an industry? This is a question, you've got a 50% chance of being right. How many people say yes, franchising is an industry? The franchising industry, right? Right. How many people say no? Yeah, it's usually about a 50-50 split on that. It's an interesting question if you think about that. Is franchising an industry? It doesn't seem like an important question, but it's really fundamental as to how you think about franchising. And the answer is franchising is not an industry. All right? So if franchising is not an industry, what is it? Over here you said it is not an industry. What is it?
I think franchising
Franchising is used across industries. Yes, absolutely. But franchising itself is a business methodology. It's a pre-structured approach in which two parties come together in hopes of mutual gain. All right, there are other alternatives to something like a franchise. Licensing agreements. Franchising is actually a subcategory of licensing. Distributorships. I would imagine you're familiar with distributorships, right, Paul? That is a business methodology as well. Dealerships, car dealerships. If any of you are in the insurance agency, you have agency agreements. These are all different pre-structured approaches that bring two parties together in hopes that both parties will end up better as a result of that partnership. Okay? So that's what franchising is. It's a business methodology. It's not an industry. So when you buy a franchise, what do you buy? Anybody have any idea? A plan? Okay. I get loud when I'm here, don't I? So when you buy a plan, what else? Foundational. If you look at a franchise agreement.
A business vehicle.
A business vehicle? Yep. When you look at the contract, what you're actually buying is the rights. It's really the license, okay? The rights to use and follow the franchisor's business operating system. Usually on an exclusive basis, not always, but usually on an exclusive basis within your prescribed territory as defined in the contract, okay? So it's a license to use a system. It's proprietary rights is really what you're buying. A lot of people think I'm buying the brand name. You're not buying the brand name. The franchisor will always own the brand name, okay? What you're buying is the rights to use that system and to be part of that system. That make sense? Any questions on that before I go on? All right. So the second thing people say is I say, talk to me about franchising. Name one franchise. Anybody right now, name a franchise. McDonald's. It's amazing. That's 50% of the people say McDonald's, okay? 90% of the time, people will name a fast food restaurant. That's interesting, isn't it? 90%, name a franchise, it'll be a fast food restaurant. Name a franchise that is not a fast food restaurant. Ace Hardware. That's a very interesting one because Ace Hardware doesn't consider themselves a franchise. Ace Hardware consider themselves to be a co-op type structure, I believe. However, there are some states that actually define them as a franchise based on how they're structured. So it could absolutely. But when I say name something that's not a restaurant, about 75% of the time the answer is another storefront business. Right? What I want to do is just widen your horizons just a little bit. Franchising covers plus or minus about 75 different industries. Something you may not have known. About 50% of those industries include a retail store. The other 50% don't. No retail store involved. So when Ray Kroc said the only thing that matters is location, 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 that was true for McDonald's. It's not necessarily true for many other franchises that don't actually have physical locations. Or they might work out of an office or a warehouse or a home. Some have no equipment, some you have lots of equipment. Some of these have no employees, some of them have lots of employees. Let's see here. Some have very modest investments and some have very, very high investments. Does anybody know what the most expensive industry is for franchising? What industry is the most expensive?
Restaurants.
That's the second most expensive. Hotels, exactly. Hotels are the most expensive industry. Some franchises are individual. So people say, I don't want to get into a franchise because I don't want to be standing behind the counter all day making sandwiches. Well, there are some people who do that. They buy an individual location, they run it with their family, and they're good to go. That's what they do, all right? There are other people who have become so large as franchisees that they went public. There are franchisee organizations that have hundreds and hundreds of locations across the country, all right? So the scale can be very, very large on the franchisee side, or it can be smaller. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't want to get into franchise because the economy is not in the right place. Remember, franchising is not an industry, right? Franchising works across industries. So some industries are positively correlated with the economy, some are negatively correlated, and some have no correlation at all, right? So if you look at something that's in like new housing development, that would probably be a positive correlation. The economy goes up, that particular franchise sector would go up, right? And then down, obviously, the other direction. But there's some that have absolutely no connection at all to the industry. If your hot water heater starts to leak tomorrow, are you going to wait for the economy to change? You're not, right? At the end of the day, what you're going to do is you're going to call somebody and say, I need you here now. right? There's a lot of plumbing franchises out there. There's a lot of disaster remediation franchises we'll talk about here in the Nashville area. Some have very tightly managed systems, and some of the tightly managed systems require that you really go lockstep with what they do, right? The franchisor really tells you exactly in a very prescribed way what you do. There's other franchise systems that are far more loosely managed. And finally, there's some that require a full-time owner be involved in the business all day, every day. It's actually in the contract. You must be full-time focused on your business. There's other franchises out there that really don't want you in the business. There's actually some that want you to have a full-time job, and you run the business through management on what we call a semi-absentee basis. I bring all this to your attention just to let you know that franchising is much wider and broader than most people fully understand. It's not just McDonald's, all right? It really covers a lot of different sectors. Before I go on and start talking about some demographic type information and performance information, any questions on this? On these couple of slides is what franchising is, the scope of franchising, anything like that.
Can you give an example? How would a franchise take themselves public if they're a franchise?
How would a franchise take themselves public how would a franchisee do that? At the end of the day, they have the rights to run restaurants. This was a company called Apple South. It was in the 1990s that they did this. They had about 300 restaurants. They owned, they operated them. They are their own entity. And they actually did go public back in the 1990s.
Still paying all the royalties?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. They had a P&L and a balance sheet, and they were publicly traded. And I believe they went private, so I don't believe they're still public, but that was back in the 1990s. But statistically, I'm going to show you some stuff from the IFA, the International Franchise Association, and FranData. But one of the statistics I heard is that there are more franchisees in the United States today with over 50 locations than there are franchisors in the United States today with over 50 locations. So scalability is absolutely available if you want it, but it's not required. It's something depending on what the individual wants. Any other questions before I go on? Nope? All right. Let's talk about some national data. And this is, obviously coronavirus is the subject of the day, right? And what happened in the world of franchising. So I just want to bring a couple of things to your attention here. Total number of locations in the world of franchising across the United States. By the way, FranData is the kind of the number one organization provides this kind of data. They work through the IFA, and so this is a national, and they do this report every single year. This is their latest report. What we look at here is from the total number of establishments down about 2.5% in the year 2000. They expect that to rebound to about 3.5%. So it was a dip, but it wasn't really a deep dip, and it didn't last for a long time. All right? It seems to be recovering, even right now, recovering very, very quickly. In regard to gross output, which is really total sales, we see a similar thing. Now, some of the larger franchises, the hotels, the restaurants, had the biggest hit. So that's why you see the dollars getting hit more than the actual physical locations. But nonetheless, 14% down, and we've probably seen about 16% recovery this year. This, to me, is even more fascinating. This is franchise data by industry. So when you think about how did franchising do during the coronavirus, well, not too good if you look at these categories, right? If you look at lodging, personal services, which is haircuts, massage, eyelashes, all these sorts of things, right? We're looking at quick service restaurants or full service restaurants. What we can see is like in full service restaurants down 14%, and this year probably recover about half of that. All right, in regard to that. So you're looking at some industries that really got hit pretty hard. This is where it gets fascinating to me, though, is that wasn't consistent across all industries. If you look at business services, let's say staffing services, for example, they actually weren't even growing before the pandemic, right? And the pandemic moved them into positive territory, and it looks like they're growing aggressively after that. If you look at residential services, you had talked about Ace Hardware. There's actually a franchise called Ace Handyman Services, right? There's a painting services, somebody to clean your pool, somebody to spray your yard, all the different services that people use in residential settings. It was a boom year last year. Everybody was sitting at home saying, I need this fixed. It's been forever and we need to do it, let's get it done now. So last year was a really good year for a lot of these industries, and it looks like it's carrying on at 3.4% is what we expect in this next year, which is again an accelerated growth. Real estate, of course, has been consistent and flat, and flat at a very high level, right? But that's continuing to grow. And so, again, it's a have and have not situation, right? So franchising holistically had a dip, it's come back, and some industries got hit a lot harder than others. But overall, I think the recovery, as we're seeing, is pretty robust. Any questions on this data before I go on? Nothing? All right. So let's talk about Nashville. I got a couple of slides that I pulled out of their report that I think, and actually Fran Data was kind enough to actually pull this information and send it to me specifically for you guys to see. But if you look at food, it's about 40%. You look at non-food, it's about 60% in regard to the Nashville metropolitan area. And when we start dividing that up by industry, QSR stands for quick service restaurants. That's the McDonald's of the world, right? And so we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood about 30% being the QSR. So that's why we say quick service first, because it is the largest sector. But you start looking around at all the other industries that are out there, and it really starts to give you kind of a pretty nice spectrum in regard to the many different ways in which franchising is part of our everyday lives, okay? If you look at the Nashville metro area, Nashville franchisors, and there's about 16 franchisors that headquarter in the Nashville metropolitan area, all right? These 16 franchisors support 44,000 jobs, $3.6 billion of economic output, which is, again, gross sales, basically, is that number, in regard to the total U.S. economy. They have about 7,000, what is that? About 8,000 plus locations between their franchise locations and their company-owned locations, so around 8,500 locations, something in that neighborhood. So these franchisors have very, very large footprints across the United States. They employ a lot of people, they drive a lot of dollars, and since their headquarters are here, those dollars are coming back into the general Nashville community. There were approximately 4,000 franchises in the Nashville metropolitan area, and I was able to get them to extract some information just from Montgomery County. And so we have about 370 franchise locations here in Montgomery County as well. So it kind of gives you a sense of how franchising impacts it. If you look at the gross sales, if we go back to that, $870 billion of output, that's approximately 3.5% of US GDP. Just to put it into perspective, all right? In 1950, franchising had no impact on the US economy. In all real sense, there were a few franchisors, but in all real senses, it didn't exist in any kind of a measurable form. Today, it's about 3.5% of total US GDP. So what we see is year after year, franchising continuing to take a larger and larger portion of the economic pie. Franchisors in the Nashville area. These are probably all brands that you've heard of, I would assume. ChemDry, founded in 1977, almost 2,000 locations. The parent company of ChemDry is actually Belfor. Does anybody know Belfor? That's interesting. Pardon? That is the parent company, yeah. Belfor owns ChemDry. They bought it a number of years ago. Belfor does about $500 million a year in sales, last time I looked at it. They're the largest privately owned, actually I think they're the largest disaster remediation company in the United States. When large disasters happen, Belfor rolls in with their semis and their generators and their teams and their trucks. They're an amazing organization, and they actually own ChemDry. Hardee's, I believe was actually founded here, founded in 1960. CKE Restaurants owns Hardee's. Now, just so you know, this employee data is a little bit off, all right? And I couldn't figure out a way to get the right data. In regard to the ChemDry, 317, I believe, is their corporate employees staff, whereas when you look at the total number of employees for Hardee's, I believe that is the total staff of all locations across the United States, all right? And I couldn't quite find all the numbers on one side or all the numbers on the other side, so I kind of had to go both ways with it. ServPro is another disaster remediation. It is interesting when you start digging into this. You have a lot of disaster remediation companies headquartered in Nashville, and I didn't realize that till I started doing some of this research. But again, 1967, with 1,700 locations, 450 employees. Carl's Jr. is also part of CKE Group, a restaurant group. 1941. I mean, that's a very early franchisor, been around a long time. Enhance does wood floor refinishing. They have 500 locations across the United States. Captain D's Seafood, which you've heard of. And then there's others out there. Does anybody know D1?
It's a gym.
Yeah.
Started by a ex-UT football player.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a gym for young people, usually for high school students or junior high students. And what they want to do is they want to help these students be better prepared in athletics in hopes of getting a D1 scholarship, basically. That's why it's called D1. But it's a sports and health fitness type of thing for kids. Show homes, they do home staging. Probably an industry you never thought about when it comes to franchising, right? Staging homes to help them on, but they're totally connected to the real estate marketplace. Village Inn, Just Love Coffee Cafe. Bang Dag, I don't know how to say that, but it's actually a tire company. And I wasn't familiar with that one, but that's another one that's headquartered here. And I believe, I think Phil and I had a conversation on this. I believe it's owned by Bridgestone. I forget who owns them, but they're part of a larger tire company. And they're a tire organization as well. So these are all companies that are headquartered here in the Nashville area. Again, I don't know exactly which towns they're located in. Any questions on that? Nope. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the market advantage of franchising. We'll take a little bit of time with this because we've got to talk about how does franchising work. All right. We know that franchising done correctly provides individuals with a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Not all franchises are good, right? Not all franchises do it perfectly. But when done correctly, it provides an economic and strategic advantage in the marketplace. But how does it do that? So we want to talk about the ways in which this happens. And so we're going to start out with what I call the opening curve. So when people look at franchising, a lot of times they're like, well, why do you want to get into a franchise? Or what's franchising about? And it's to help somebody get into business. That's what everybody always thinks about. The training, the support. A lot of franchisees, when they join a franchise, don't have any experience in that particular industry, right? So if you're going to be a franchisor, you're going to have to teach them everything they need to know about how to find a location, if locations are important, how to hire people, how to set up, how to get everything going, and how to get down that learning curve. In the first year, that's critical, right? So the opening curve, I assume almost all of you own businesses, is that right? Yes? Okay. How many of you started that business day one as a bootstrap entrepreneur and had no idea what you were doing, and you just went and figured it out? Yeah. How many of you made a lot of mistakes like I did the first time? Right? The learning curve is expensive, it takes money, and it takes time, right? And so the franchisor's job is to help you down that learning curve more effectively and more predictably. So that's what everyone thinks about, but I think that is probably, out of the four items, that might actually be the least impactful long term. It's nice for the first 6 months to a year, but after that, you know what you're doing, right? So what happens after that? And how do franchises continue to outcompete? And I think the second and third one really come into the infrastructural systems that franchise systems bring are critical to being able to compete in a marketplace, right? So are you all familiar with CRM systems? Customer relationship management software? As a small business owner, imagine on one side of the road you have, Paul's Pizza, right? And on the other side of the road you have Domino's. Who's going to have a better CRM system? Domino's. Why? Do you want Paul's Pizza? Do you want a CRM system?
Would I?
Yeah. Can you afford it?
Probably not.
Probably not. Not only can't you afford it, but if you chose to afford it, you wouldn't get enough benefit back from it, right? You'd never recoup the total investment because you're not able to scale it across locations, all right? So when you start looking at CRM systems, search engine optimization, SEO, right? Building websites today is easy peasy. Everybody does it. I've got a bunch of websites. Easy to build a website. Getting people to find your website, to use your website and to get your website to be actually an engine to help you with your business, that's a whole different world, all right? Franchisors' job is to not just help build the website, to make sure that it's found, to make sure that it's driving business towards you, that it's helping you, I guess, connect with and retain customers. So in going back to our previous example, if I want to order a pizza from Paul's Pizza, how do I do that? I probably call Paul's Pizza, right? And I say, I'd like to order a pizza. But the reality is you might already be on the line with somebody else. And I get a busy signal, right? If I want to do Domino's, or especially if my wife wants to order Domino's, how does that happen? How does she order Domino's? She goes on the app. And what does it do? As soon as she gets on there, what does it do? It says, this is what you ordered last time. Do you want to do the same thing? Right? And she says, yes. Right? This is your credit card from last time. Do you want to use the same credit card? And then as soon as she says yes, then this little pizza starts going around and telling you, okay, it's now in prep, and it's now in the oven, and it's now here, and do you want us to deliver? It's so integrated that it becomes easy, right? And it's a big difference when it comes to attracting customers, and not only that, Domino's knows my wife. So what can she do? They can email her and say, here's a coupon, you haven't been around for a while. This total integration today is really important. It's how we get and retain customers. It's very hard to do as a small independent business owner. It's technically difficult, it's expensive, and it takes a lot of time. So franchise systems deliver a lot of this to you. When you think about purchasing advantages, going back to the pizza example, who's buying their pepperoni at a better price? Domino's or Paul's? Domino's, right? So they're building their pizza for less money. That takes their food cost down. But Domino needs to advertise, right? So where do they advertise? They can do it online. They can also do it through like Valpak. By the way, Valpak, you know about Valpak, the little coupons you get in the thing? You all know Valpak? All right, money mailer, these sorts of things. Who can get into Valpak at a lower price? Paul's or Domino's? Domino's. Even though it's a local franchisee, there's a national pricing structure that's already been set up. You start structuring all these advantages together, and it starts to mean something in the marketplace. And this is what a good franchise should be able to do for you. I'm going to give you one other example of an industry that a lot of times we don't think about. We talked about it a little bit at dinner yesterday, but I want to talk about maid services. This is an industry that nobody pays any attention to. It's usually a lady and her friend who come and they clean your house, right? So there's not really a lot of sophistication. How can you apply infrastructure and systems to a business like this? Well, believe it or not, it's really incredible how it's done, all right? So when you start to look at Mary's cleaning service, right, and you compare it to any one of the large franchise systems, I was working with a lady up in Brooksville, Florida, and she had her own cleaning service. She had like 3 or 4 maids that worked underneath her. And I asked her, I said, what does it cost you to send out one of those little postcards to people, say, I want to clean your house? It cost her about $1.25 per postcard. She had to have it designed. She had to have it printed, right? She had to acquire the names. She had to figure out where they were located. She then had to apply those onto there. Then she had to put stamps on it, and she had to mail them. And when do you think those people call and say, my house is dirty, can you help? Do they do that on a Monday morning? No. When do they call? Sunday night. And what's she doing on Sunday night? She's at home with her family, right? So it goes into voicemail. She calls back on Monday. They're at work. You see where this is going? All right? So when you start looking at how you do this, it's very difficult. And you compare that to, let's say, the cleaning authority, for example. There's the cleaning authority, there's Molly Maids, there's the maids. There's a number of different franchised maid services. I just want to give you a sense of the sophistication. So the cleaning authority will send out over 1 million flyers a week across the United States. It's done by postal zip codes and by carrier route. So as a franchisee, you say, I want my flyers to go to this carrier route, not this zip code, this carrier route this week. You put it into their system. Automatically, all of those go out. Those things are sent out for less than the cost of a stamp. The way they do that is through bulk mailing advantages, right? So they have them printed in giant volumes. They already have acquired all the names. They have everything there. Everything goes out automatically. The hit rate for the cleaning authority and the lady in Brooksville is about the same, about 1.5%. It's pretty small, right? But when somebody responds to the cleaning authority's flyer, they're calling a 1-800 number. And they don't know it, but that's a 1-800 that is uniquely set up for that flyer. So as soon as it goes into the 1-800 system, it goes to their 24/7 call center the franchisor manages on behalf of the franchisees. The call center answers it and knows exactly what flight that call is coming from. So they will answer it, hello, this is the cleaning authority of Clarksville, can I help you? Even though they're located in Maryland, okay? The person says, yeah, I'm looking at getting the clean. This is Sunday night, right? I'm looking to get my house cleaned. It's like, great, how many square feet do you have? Person says, well, about this many. You say, well, normally our pricing would be between this amount and that amount. Would you like us to schedule a time to come see you? Person says, yeah, that'd be great. Well, they have an integrated scheduling system. So they are able to go and look at what the whole system is. They have times that the franchisee has made available for appointments, and they schedule them into those slots that have already been made. Franchisee comes back to work on Monday morning, they have schedules and appointments already set up because it was all done automatically. They don't miss. If you only have a 1 to 1.5% hit rate, you better answer the phone, right? Because that's not a big hit rate. So when that franchisee actually goes to that person's house, what's the chance they're going to get a new piece of business? Really high, right? Because two things we know. One is they need the service because they called, right? The other thing we know is they're comfortable with the price range. I think the number 70 to 75% of the time they'll get new business, all right? Then they put their teams in, and they have complete information regarding the efficacy of their teams. So when the team goes there, they know how long the team has been there. They know how long it took them to clean, right? They know what the retention rates are for their teams, if the customer stays with them or doesn't stay with them. They know how long the teams are taking to go from place to place. And all of these numbers are transparent across all the franchisees in the entire system. So if your retention rate as a franchisee starts to drop, it shows up as a flag on the franchisor side, and they give you a call and say, hey, listen, I don't know if you noticed or not, but the average retention is here, you're here, what can we do to help you improve your retention rate? Is that powerful? Right? This is how, when you look at those franchise systems, the average franchisee in those maid services does over $1 million a year in sales. That's the average, and that's according to their disclosure document, which we'll talk about. All right? So these infrastructural systems make a difference, and this is one of the foundational things. The next thing has to do with fellow franchisees. If you go down to that from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, it's fellow franchisees. When you start your own business, day one, from the ground up, and you're trying to figure out what to do, it's hard to find somebody that you can talk to give you good advice. The only person that will really understand your business model, understand exactly what you should do to be successful, are called competitors, right? They're running the exact same business, they know exactly what needs to be done, and they're not going to tell you, right? It's hard to find. You can always find feedback groups, but usually these groups are a bunch of leaders that are all in different industries that are non-competitive. But what you really need is the guy down the road who's beating you to tell you how to get back at them, right? And that's hard to find. I know, because my first business was an independent business, and I had a hard time finding answers to questions that I needed in order to become more successful. In the case of a franchise system, you have fellow franchisees, right? So the franchisor is going to teach you for the first year, but how do you continue to improve 5 years, 6 years, 7 years into it? The way you do that is with fellow franchisees. You have best management practices, you have feedback loops. I've been a franchise coach now for almost 20 years. There's a group of 5 other consultants that I work with. We speak to each other every single week, and we've been doing it for 15 years. What do you know about that franchise? What's going on? Why'd that person, hey, you put somebody over there, how are they doing? How are they being properly supported? We're constantly sharing information. It makes us all better as a result, okay? So these feedback loops are really powerful. The last thing on here really has to do with resale value. And I don't want to get into a long discussion on valuation of companies. I have bought and sold both franchised and non-franchised companies. What I will tell you is that a franchised business will sell faster, it'll sell more readily, and it'll sell at higher value than a small independent business. Middle-sized businesses are different, all right? But if you look at a small independent business, the number one buyer for a franchise? Do you know who it would be? Who's most likely, if you have a Subway and you want to sell your Subway and it's a good Subway at a reasonable price, who's most likely to buy it? Another Subway owner. About 50% of the time, based on my experience, that's not a friend data stat, that's a Rick stat, but about 50% of the time it's going to be a fellow franchisee's going to come out and buy it. It's never even going to hit the market, okay? The valuations are pretty transparent. It's easy to understand. And on top of that, there's all the financial systems, so we don't have to worry about how much, not everybody's good at accounting, right? Let's put it that way. And so when you go to buy a business, you want to know what the numbers are. You need to be able to really verify those numbers. And the numbers are far more transparent. They're more easily verifiable, which translates into actual value when you're able to verify the numbers. Resale value I think is also very important. Any questions on this and by the way, just so you know, one last thing on this is that this is not just an advantage of franchising. These are the same advantages that you find in most chain-based businesses. So Starbucks, for example, has most of these advantages, but they're not a franchise system. Okay, Starbucks is all company-owned. So when you look at this, chain-based businesses have these scale. The only thing is that as a franchisee, as an independent business owner, it's hard to get these advantages. And that's really where franchising should be able to do a good job for you. Any questions before I go to the next one? Nope? All right. So I want to talk briefly about the give and take. What is the deal, in essence, right? Because nothing comes for free. You don't get all of this for nothing, right? So you have to give up something and you get something. And I want to talk about, first of all, what you give up. What does the franchisee give up? What does the franchisor give up? Interestingly, it's the same thing on both sides, all right? The franchisee and the franchisor both give up money. They give up profit, all right? So if, let's say you own a business, and with that business you are able to run your business and you have a 20% bottom line, just for the sake of throwing a number out there, okay? You have the option to grow that through company operations. You can open a second location, a third location. You get that 20%, right? When you franchise it, you give up that bottom line. You get a royalty, which is going to be a smaller percent than that 20%, maybe 5, 6%. So it depends on the industry. But you're going to get that. So you're giving up a portion of that bottom line. And so you're like, well, why would you want to give all that up, right? The other thing you're giving up is control. When you have a company operation and it's not going well, you can fire people. You can make decisions that have to be followed immediately. That's not the case in the world of franchising because these are two independent business owners, right? So you're giving up control, you're giving up bottom line. Interestingly, the franchisee is doing the same thing. There's not a single franchise system out there where an individual can't open the same business themselves. Go back to maid services. There's no reason anybody couldn't open a maid service tomorrow, right? And if they did, they wouldn't have to pay a royalty. They could keep all the money for themselves, right? And at the same time, not only do they give up money, but they give up operational control. When you're a creative entrepreneur and you get to do it all yourself, there's that wonderful opportunity to say, gosh, I'm doing it all myself and I'm the decision maker and the buck stops with me. Well, in a franchise system, you're part of a larger community. So you don't have that independence and control. So both sides give up both money and control. What is interesting to me is what they get. And it's kind of different on both sides. In the case of the franchisor, what you get is an owner running that location. And owners simply outperform managers. There's statistics you can look. You can just look at franchise disclosure documents and compare company-owned locations to franchised locations, and you will see regularly. You'll see that the franchise locations will outperform usually 5, 10, 15% higher gross sales and higher profitability, because they have a vested interest, right? You put your money in it, you're going to be there, and you're going to make sure that thing works. Managers aren't quite as vested, right? So there's some businesses that work better when you have a manager in charge. But there's a lot of businesses where an owner is going to do better, right? So first of all, you get an owner. Second thing is you get accelerated growth. Growing a business takes capital, right? It takes financial capital. It takes human resource capital, right? It takes a whole bunch of resources to grow a business and to open locations and to grow into a larger organization. So the question is, where do you get the money to do that? Sometimes you go public, like Starbucks. They get a whole bunch of money coming in. Everyone thought it was great, and they built a bunch of locations. But that's the exception, okay? In most cases, if you have Paul's Pizza, Hey, Paul, you might open a second location next year, you might open 2 after that, but after 3 years, you've got about 4 locations, right? And that's if you've done really well and you've been right on top of it. But if you franchised, 5 years from now, how many locations could you have open? Assuming you had a good system and everything was in line, you could have 150 locations open, right? Accelerated growth allows you to get out there in the marketplace and become bigger much faster. The other thing is return on invested assets. And this is, I don't know if we have any financial people in the audience today, but one of the calculations you look at when you value businesses has to do with how much money did you invest, what are your invested assets in regard to the return on investment, right? Well, when you're building pizza joints, what you end up with is putting a lot of money into each location, you have a lot of invested capital, and you have a certain amount of return, and that gives you that ratio. Well, what happens if you don't have to own any of those locations yourself? What if they're not on your balance sheet at all, but you still have income off of them, off of a royalty? What does your return on invested assets ratio look like? Much better, right? So when you're taking a company and you're building value in your franchisor organization, and one day you want to sell that organization, it's going to be a lot better when that ratio, that return on invested assets is much better. That's today in the world of franchising, the private equity, the venture capital world is all over franchising. A lot like Blackstone owns one of these. These are venture capital groups. They own hundreds and hundreds of franchise systems and are acquiring them all the time, all right? And the reason is because their invested capital is low and their return on invested capital ratio is quite high, and they love it because of that, okay? So this is some of the reasons why people want to become a franchisor. Even though they're giving away that bottom line, they're giving away some control. Those benefits are worth it for them, okay? On the other hand, with the franchisee, systems and support, we've already talked about that, right? You can go figure it out yourself, or you get into a franchise, again, assuming it's a good franchise, a lot of that will be delivered to you. And that's kind of nice. There's creative entrepreneurs who want to do it themselves, but there's executive entrepreneurs, people who are just they just want to do it. They don't want to invent it. They don't want to create the system. They're all about getting from point A to point B as reliably as possible, right? And that's what the systems and support allows that franchisee to do. Risk reduction. Opening businesses is risky. Some survive, some don't. Well, with franchising, there's 2 things. One is your risk should be lower, otherwise why are you doing it? You should never invest in a franchise if you think it's not reducing your business risk. That's foundational, right? But when you also look at the, I forgot what I was going to say. But business risk, obviously, reduction is very, very important. Oh, you can measure it. That was the other thing I was going to say, is that in the case of your due diligence with franchising through the disclosure documents, which we're going to talk about on the next slide, you can actually measure how many have opened, how many have closed, why. For the last 3 years by state, you know what the success rate is. So if you want to say, does it reduce my risk? Not only can you interview franchisees, you can build your P&Ls, you can learn all about it, but you can also see the track record of success and closure by location. And that's powerful when you're a franchisee and you're thinking about investing your money, you've never been a business owner before. It's nice to be able to actually see those numbers. And then, of course, community. We talked about fellow franchisees before. There are people who want to do it by themselves. That's my dad. My dad had his own business my entire life, and he would listen to you. But that was about it. After that, he'd do exactly what he wants, right? And that was great, and he was very successful doing that. But there's other people who really want to be part of a community of like-minded people, that they can feel like they have people to talk to and they're part of something, as opposed to being, out there all by themselves. So that's really the give and take, what you give up but what you get in the world of franchising. Any questions on this before I go on to the FDD? Nope? All right. I'm going to go through this a little bit faster, but just so you know, every franchisor in the United States by law must have what's called a franchise disclosure document. It's about a 200 to 400 page document. It's a big, robust document that every franchisor has to create. It's all part of what's called the franchise rule, which is the body of law that governs franchising, okay? Every FDD in the United States has the exact same table of contents. The information is delivered in the exact same format. So you know exactly what to look for and where to find it. And I don't want to go through and start looking at FDDs. It'll take us a long time to do that. But just so you know, let's imagine you're looking at a franchise system and there's a whole bunch of litigation with their franchisees. You'd like to know that, right? It's all going to be in item 3, not just current litigation, but anything over the last 10 years that has been resolved is going to be listed in here. What's the total cost to get into the franchise? It's, well, I'm sorry, what are the total fees? What is the total cost? Trademarks. Do they actually own their trademarks? Well, all the trademark information will be there with the registrations. You can look them up if you want to. We had talked a little bit about earnings. Everybody wants to know, how much money can I make? Well, item 19 doesn't necessarily answer that question conclusively, okay? We call them financial performance representations. What item 19 does is franchisors have a choice. They can either share information regarding earnings or they can choose not to. About 70, probably 65% of franchisors today share information on earnings. The other 35% choose not to, all right? There are some attorneys who tell franchisors, please do not share information on earnings, because if anybody gets upset, they'll say you misled them, right? So they say, please don't put anything in item 19 at all. But a lot of franchisors today are, but a lot of times it'll be gross sales numbers, it'll be top line numbers, not necessarily bottom line numbers. It's very hard to consolidate P&Ls across many different franchisees, especially when different franchisees are putting different things in. But what are your product costs? What are your gross sales? Some of the top line numbers can be consolidated. So you'll get some information. But the only way to really build a P&L is by interviewing franchisees, which is all part of the system, because the name, address, and phone number of every franchisee is in these documents. So you can actually go out and talk to franchisees as well. Also, we talked about number of outlets, how many outlets they open, how many they close, by state for the last 3 years. All of that will be here in table format. There's 5 tables, and table 3 gives you all of that. It'll also tell you if company bought franchised locations back, if they were resold. So it's a lot of really good information. And again, every franchisor has an FDD, and they are required by law to deliver it to a prospective franchisee a minimum of 2 weeks prior to executing any kind of a contract. So the idea, of course, is to provide as much transparency and information as possible. Any questions on FDDs? No? All right. Let's talk about financing options. Now, I assume that a lot of you in the audience probably are not, you may or may not decide that you want to be a franchisee, but I want to talk about financing kind of in 2 ways. One is, if you want to be a franchisee, how do people finance their business, right? But the other thing is, if you want to be a franchisor or you're a vendor, let's say you're a banker, how do franchisees normally, where do they normally get their money from, right? So if we go back to the FDD, what number is that? It says financing. Item 10. You see item 10, financing? Generally in that sector, it's just one paragraph. It says, we do not offer financing in-house. We have third-party vendors that we work with. And we will refer you to those vendors, and we will help you to find the financing that you need. That's pretty much what's in that item 10 almost all the time. It's always a very short little area. So financing, as I break it down, goes into 2 basic categories. One is equity financing. All right? 3 basic types of equity financing that I generally see. One, of course, is cash. Person has the cash, they put it into the business, they control it, they have the ownership. It's an equity investment. Second thing is partnerships or investors. I'm not a big fan of operating partnerships, but investor relationships, a lot of times through friends or family or people who know you and trust you. That's something that works, and it works really well. I've invested in people's businesses before. I don't want to be a part of the operation. I have the normal protections that you'd want in that kind of an investment. But if they do well with their business, of course, I get distributions, and at some point in the sale, I'll get value off of that. So it's actually worked out quite well for me. Friends and family are there because that's normally where you find investors. You're not going to normally find them by standing on the street over here and saying, I need money, right? It's going to be someone who knows you, trusts you, believes in you, and really wants to invest in you because they believe it'll be a good investment. The other one I have here is something that a lot of people haven't heard of, but it's been around since 1989, all right? It's called a ROBS program. Does anybody know what a ROBS program is? You do, wonderful, very good. So ROBS program is called Rollover for Business Startup. So there are people who have money in retirement programs, right? This is pre-tax money. So long as the money is pre-tax and self-directed. Right now that money is most likely being invested in stocks. It's in a TD Ameritrade account, and you're buying stocks or mutual funds, which are collections of stocks, right? So most of us with our retirement funds buy ownership in businesses. We buy equity ownership, in most cases, with our retirement fund. But we're buying it in businesses we don't control, businesses we have no say over how they're operated. What the ROBS program allows you to do is to take all or a portion of your retirement fund. Let's say you've got $800,000 and you need $200,000. You sell $200,000 worth of stock, So you have $200,000 of cash in your thing, and then you buy Paul Corp. You set up your own, Paul's Pizza Place, right? You set up your own corporation. You put $200,000, and then the ownership comes into your retirement program. So your retirement program basically just bought one stock and sold another stock. There's no withdrawal, no distributions, no penalties, because you're not withdrawing it. You're just selling one stock and buying another stock. All right? The nice thing about it is it's equity financing, so you don't have the debt overhead when you start your business. It leads you to break even faster, right? And you're using pre-tax money, which is kind of nice. It's kind of having, from just a risk mitigation point of view, that's kind of nice as well. But the owner is your retirement program at that point. You are an employee. You get paid a salary. You can get paid a bonus. But if there's a distribution, it goes to the owner, which is your tax-deferred entity called your retirement program. So it's been around since 1989. The acronym ROBS program is the acronym the IRS gives it. So this isn't a if, maybe, whatever. This is something that's been around a long time. There's literally probably 10,000 of these that have been done, and there's companies who specialize in just this program. But those are the equity alternatives that I normally see. When it comes to debt financing, SBA guaranteed loans are quite common, especially for anything that's a little bit larger. Well, that's not true. The SBA guaranteed loans really fall into two categories. One is the SBA Express program. In the world of franchising, SBA Express programs usually cap out at about 150. I know that the rules of the SBA don't say they have to, but at the end of the day, about 150 is where they cap out the SBA Expresses. They're pretty easy to get, so long as you have an income and you have a good credit score and that sort of thing. It's a lump sum distribution, and you can fund, a small service-based business usually with an investment like that. The other are the 7A loans, which are the larger loans, which are closer to, but you'd have to probably put 25% down, maybe 30% down. The bank would give you the rest. But these are programs, I've done SBA loans. Well, we opened a fitness franchise in Bradenton, where I live, and we did an SBA loan, and it worked great for us. And regardless of what's going on with the economy, we did our SBA loan in 2009. No problems. It worked out just fine. They funded us. We got funded a month and a half after Lehman Brothers collapsed. So right in the middle of all of that, and you say, why did we open a business at that point? Well, because real estate was cheap, and we could find employees anywhere. Think about that today. Today's real estate's really expensive, right? And finding employees is really difficult. We were talking about that. So anyhow, that's the SBA guaranteed loans. Equipment loans. Let's say you own a maid service. Well, one piece of equipment you might need is cute little cars with wraps on them, right? Well, you can fund all of those through equipment loans. You can also do restaurant equipment, you can do fitness equipment. When we looked at our fitness thing, we could do equipment loan for the equipment, or we could have done an SBA loan. The SBA was the one we chose, but we could have gone either way with it. HELOCs, of course, we're all familiar with those. Sublocks, so if you have an investment account where you're investing, let's say with TD Ameritrade, they'll give you a line of credit against that. And interestingly, they'll do it very readily. They love to do it because they make money on both sides that way. But the interest rate's really low. And there's some advantages to it. And it works just like a home equity line, so if you don't use it, you don't have to pay for it. Usually they'll do it within a week and not too many questions, no fees, and a low interest rate. So signature loans, not nearly as common, but I do see it sometimes. I actually, probably in 20 years, I've seen it twice in regard to credit cards. So somebody got let go from a company. At the end of the year, they have a large lump sum distribution that's coming, but it's not here yet. So they'll get a couple of credit cards for $50,000 each, no interest for a year. They'll start the business, and when the lump sum comes in, they'll pay off the credit cards. So those are some of the things there. This is, business loans are on the bottom of the list for basically the fact that you're not going to normally get a business loan. It's going to end up becoming one of these other loans. It's going to end up collateralized with your house, or it's going to end up collateralized with something else, or it's going to end up with an SBA guarantee on it. So it's on the bottom of the list because it usually doesn't end up being a pure business loan unless you have a large existing business with proven cash flow already. Then, of course, they're much easier to get. The bottom is the stuff that people talk about that I've never actually seen. Grants. There are a lot of grants out there. We know with the Chamber of Commerce and with cities, we get grants all the time for things. But a grant is a gift of money to go do something, right? And I've actually to date never seen any government entity say, here's $150,000 because we want you to start a business and you don't have to pay us back, you're all good, all right? So I haven't seen grants. I had a guy who explained to me how he was going to do it with a barter exchange. That's never happened. Crowdfunding I haven't seen yet, but I think one day I will. I haven't seen it yet that somebody's been able to crowdsource funding to open up, a larger investment. So that's all the financing stuff. Again, if you are looking to be a vendor to the franchising sector, and you look at all these different financing things, you really don't want to work with individual prospective franchisees. It's going to be far too much work for you. What you want to do is you want to build relationships with franchisors, and you want to build relationships with organizations that provide financing services to prospective franchisees and become one of their vendors, okay? Because that's where you can get real volume. It's too difficult to do it just on a one-by-one basis, unless you're a local bank and you have, local relationships. But any questions on that before I go to my last slide here? I'm going to just spend 1 minute and share with you what I do. I have been a franchise coach now for almost 20 years. What I do is I work with individuals who want to become franchisees, people who are considering getting into business for themselves, and they want somebody to help them go through the process and to identify franchises that actually meet their skill sets. So what we do is we go through a consultation process to kind of really clearly define who the person is, what they're trying to accomplish, and what resources they have, and what are the parameters. In other words, it's a written description of what perfect would look like. We then find businesses that are available in their targeted area, businesses that have good track records of success, and businesses that meet their criteria to the best of our ability. And it would be multiple franchises, right? So the idea is you don't know if a franchise is good unless you compare it to others. You don't know if it's the best match unless you compare it to other possible matches, right? So the idea is to look at multiple franchises. We normally work with 3 franchises at a time and really dive into a very deep due diligence. And so what I do is I just teach people, how do you tear a franchise company apart? How do you interview a franchisee, right? How do you build a P&L through those interviews? I don't give them the numbers, I can't do that. But what I can do is teach them how to do these things, which franchisees to target, how to go through an FDD, right? How to look at an FDD and how it's built. And the idea, foundationally, what we're trying to accomplish is I want to create the most educated, knowledgeable individual possible prior to signing a franchise agreement. Okay, my ideal scenario is a person becomes a franchisee and 6 months later I'm on the phone with them and I say, how's it going? And they say, as expected. I want them to know what they're getting into before they get into it, so that they're prepared, they know what it's going to take, and they're ready to go make it happen. So that's what I've been doing for, like I say, for almost 20 years now. And that was my last slide. Got 15 minutes, right? Right? Okay. So I just want to open it up for questions. Any specific questions?
Would you mind touching on, since we probably have some veterans in the room, or spouses of veterans, just touching on some of the vet programs?
Oh, okay, yeah. So, yeah. So the question was, can you touch on veterans and how veterans connect into the world of franchising? So remember we talked about creative entrepreneurs and executive entrepreneurs? Right? The creative entrepreneur has to do it their own way. They're the lone wolf, they're creative, they want to do their own thing. Executive entrepreneurs are people who know how to lead their own business, but they're willing to follow a system, right? Look how leading while following. And what we have found in the world of franchising is that people who have come out of the military service generally are really good at this sort of thing. Leadership training is a key part of a lot of the military training that is received. So knowing how to lead your group of people to be a part of a bigger movement is an important thing, right? In the world of franchising, that's valued, right? Because a strong leader at the franchisee level leads to success, but we don't want lone wolves that go do their own thing. And it's a restaurant and now you're selling cell phones in the lobby. That's not going to work, right? So what we want is we want people who know how to be part of that bigger group while also being strong leaders. And it's the track record of folks with military background is so strong that a number of years back, the International Franchise Association actually created a program called VetFran. And VetFran is a program where franchisors provide specific discounts or advantages or additional marketing dollars in order to help anybody with a military background. And some of it's pretty substantial. Some of it's not so much, but every franchisee does their own thing. But why was VetFran created? One was, of course, to say thank you, right? But the second reason is because veterans make great franchisees. They really do. They're really able to go out there and really drive a business, and they have the discipline, the leadership skills. In some cases, Not always, but in some cases they don't have the financial capabilities. But if you want to make an investment in somebody, find a great military leader and invest in their business. They're going to make it work. It's pretty neat. So, other questions? Yes?
To that point, veterans tend to retire pretty.
I'm sorry.
To that point, veterans tend to retire pretty early, and so they have this whole last half of life. And I think, especially in this area, we see that pretty often, where they're looking at how can I open my own business? How can I, what can I do? Help me do this.
Yeah.
And just in terms of the financing part, I mean, the SBA gives special discounts for veterans on their fees, and then so there's all these creative options that they may have, they just don't know. So that part of it, I'm glad you brought the veteran part up. That's gold in this area.
Yeah. There's also I worked with a veteran, I think she was in the DC area if I remember, but they have she worked with the Navy Federal Credit Union, and they had a whole bunch of programs that I was even unfamiliar with that they were able to do for her. It was pretty neat to see what they were able to do for her. Yes, sir.
I know when I look into purchasing a franchise, there's a lot of companies out there that have veterans programs within their companies as well, and they'll get pretty big discounts or special financing and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, the VetFriend program has been really embraced by franchising, really across the board. And to be honest, if you talk to a franchise system and they're not offering VetFriend, tell them. Say, why? Hold them accountable to it, and they'll put something together for you. Yes, sir.
Rick, can you share any information on Chick-fil-A's franchise business model?
So the question is, can I share information on Chick-fil-A's franchise model?
It's unique.
It's unique, yeah. So in a traditional franchise, you own the asset. So in a traditional franchise, you are going to make the investment, right? In the case of a restaurant, it could be $1 million, $1.5 million, but you are going to make the investment, you own the asset, and when you're done, you sell the asset, okay? That's not how Chick-fil-A works. Right? Chick-fil-A owns the building, they own the land, they own everything, and if I remember correctly, it's a 1-year franchise agreement that can be terminated any time, and you get a base salary plus some kind of a profit sharing. In my opinion, it's not really business ownership. It's more like a management profit sharing program. I'm not saying it's not lucrative. All right? It's lucrative.
Make a lot of money.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chick-fil-A does great. They got a lot of people, they have a lot of volume, you can make good money at it, but when you're done with it, you can't sell it, right?
That's the problem that Dan Cathy was having with most of his early franchisees now, because they're coming to the tail end of their agreement, and they can't pass this along to their kids because there's nothing to pass along.
Yeah.
So the company doesn't buy it back, that portion of it?
Well, there's not anything to buy back because you didn't buy anything.
But can they pass that owner, whatever that agreement is, to their kids? Just that
No.
piece of it, the owner?
No. No, you can't pass it on at all.
Seems more like a corporate-owned store.
Well, it's similar to the structure that often is used in gas stations. The gas station would own the pumps, they own the building, they own everything. What you own is what's on the shelf. And then you operate that business and you make money off that business. So it's a similar structure to that. It's an unusual structure. If you want to run a great quick service restaurant, Chick-fil-A is a great one. I'm just not sure that it's going to create, intergenerational wealth for you. So, were there other questions? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say back to the veterans, this new CARES Act that they passed in January, I was just telling Paul, run totally through SBA, not through a bank. And it's a grant program, but for veterans, they're in that first, and also female owners, they're in that first preferential group, and I think it's going to be 25 days. Hadn't opened yet, it's through SBA, but it's a great program for restaurants, and it's also, there's also an entertainment venue that's a separate act underneath that CARES Act, so it might be something that the chamber could put out.
Yeah.
I don't know if
I'd love to learn more about that. The comment was that through the CARES Act, there's a new, I don't know if you're hearing all that from in the microphone, so there's and through the CARES Act, there's some additional programs for veterans. So yeah, my business card's up there, and I would love to learn more about it. The whole CARES Act thing is this whole moving target that we're all trying to catch up with most of the time. So, if there's something out there that I don't know about, I'd love to learn about it. So I appreciate that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
All the good stories. What if they get disagreements? Because I've seen that between
Yep.
franchises and franchisors. What is there language in that, whatever the manual as to how you dissolve it, or is it just litigation at that point, or what?
Yeah. So the question is, if there's a disagreement, how is it resolved? Hopefully well, but not always, right? In any kind of a partnership type of relationship, disagreements happen. In item 17, and I could pull it back up there, but basically item 17 talks about renewal, termination, dispute resolution. That's what's in that particular sector. So if you want to know how that company approaches it, you pull up the FDD, to go to item 17, and it'll walk you through the dispute resolution mechanisms. Usually today they're using arbitration. In most cases, the arbitration is held in the state where the franchisor is located. That's usually how it works. It's a delicate dance, the franchisor-franchisee dance, okay? Because on some hand, you look at it and say, well, the franchisor is all powerful, right? They can do whatever they want, they own the system. It's true, but at the end of the day, what is the franchisor's stick? What can they do? If there's a problem, what is the one weapon they have?
Take away the franchise.
What's that?
Take away the franchise.
Disenfranchisement. That's correct. That is their one weapon. So let's just imagine that you and I get into a disagreement and I disenfranchise you. What happens next?
Probably you may sue.
You sue me, right? And what happens after that? Loss of revenue for me. And on top of that, you tell all your other franchisees that I'm not such a nice person.
So then they start having.
Then the system. So the stick is to disenfranchise somebody. When you use that as a franchisor, you better be really careful, because it's not an easy stick to use. All right? So it's much better to find a way to work together. Does it always happen that way? No. There are some franchise systems that are not healthy. And, but the nice thing is that if the franchise system isn't healthy, and you look at the FDD and you look at item 3 and it's got 38 pages of litigation, you don't have to go any further, right? Say, next, right? So there is a certain level of transparency in regard to that. And also in your due diligence, you should be interviewing franchisees and saying, how are you being treated? How do you feel about your relationship with the franchisor? That's part of your due diligence. Can it change? Yeah, it can.
And then the other question was, do you help in your coaching franchise? I mean, people that want to start a franchise, like they want to create. They have a location like Paul's Pizza that he wants to franchise it.
Do I help people become franchisors? The answer is no. No, that's not what I do. However, I will refer you to people who do that. There's people who specialize in that. It's a long, hard process. Just to put your FDD together, probably $25,000 of legal fees. Probably between 20 and 40, just depends on the attorney you choose to use and how complicated it gets. But the total cost of becoming a franchisor, you've got to build a development department, you have to build a training department, you have to have all the facilities there, and you do all of this to bring franchisees and to get franchises open, and that's all before you earn any royalty, right? So you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars is the real cost to become a franchisor. I have a lady I know who started a franchise, and I was sitting and asking her how much she started, and she was in for about $400,000 to $500,000 before she broke even on the franchise side. So.
This is kudos for you, Rick. You and I have been communicating.
Oh, Nisha?
In reference to Kurt.
Pleasure.
So Steve, I have a reference if anybody here wants it. And the guy has spent a lot of time, and I'm a big talker, so we were on the phone, like everybody that knows me knows that, but we were on the phone about 2 hours talking about how to start a franchise. And he's great, by the way. That's a great group.
Yeah.
It's called Brand One.
Yeah. His name's Kurt Landwehr, and there's others as well that there's a number of people out there that work to help companies franchise. To be honest with you, most people are not ready to franchise. They think they are, but they really aren't. You need to be able to, you need a system that can be replicated. You don't need a single location that works. Just because you have a single location that works doesn't mean it can be replicated, right? There's a lot of businesses that are local, they work great because the owner's there all day. Try replicating it without you being there all day in the next city over. Now, if you can do that, now you have something we're talking about. That's actually pretty interesting at that point, because now we know we can replicate. Until you know you can replicate, it's a little more difficult. So that's my advice, is try to at least have one additional location in a separate thing, run through management, put that manager through the training program, put them through the support program, everything you've developed, and treat them like a franchisee, and see how well it works. Other questions?
So say you have a viable franchise and the franchisor goes out of business or declared bankruptcy, what happens to the franchisee?
Question is, you have a viable franchise location, franchisor goes out of business, what happens to the franchisee? First of all, that's unusual in that franchise companies don't have a whole lot of physical assets, but they have royalty streams. Usually those royalty streams have value to somebody who usually buys the franchise system, usually. But if it did go out, and there are situations where that's happened. I know there was a franchise system out there that was refilling ink cartridges. I forget the name of it, but it actually closed down. You become an independent business owner. You just carry on. You become a business owner, independent business owner. In some cases, the brand name, if they're shutting it down, they don't want the brand name. Sometimes they'll sell the brand name to the franchisees or put it into a holding company the former franchisees can continue to use. In other cases, the franchisees will buy it. But at the end of the day, if you're a franchisee and the franchisor disappeared for whatever reason, you are able to continue to run your business. Basically, that franchise agreement falls away because the franchisor is no longer living up to their terms, which is to support you.
Wouldn't Blockbuster be a good example? Didn't Viacom buy them?
Yes, Blockbuster is an example of a company that went away, but I'm not sure how many franchisees continued running it on their own afterwards. Yeah. Because there's a real infrastructure issue with Blockbuster, right? Because if the franchise goes away, where are you going to get all your VHSs? Weren't they VHSs we were looking at? I forget the term, the cassette things that we used to rent. But you've got to get access to all of these movies, right? So if Blockbuster goes away, it's hard to do it as an independent, so most of them close down. But yes, in some cases, the industry just goes away in some cases. Yep.
I think we have time just for one more question, if anybody has any.
Any other questions? Well, listen, I appreciate your time. Thank you for having me. And I do have some business cards over there. And if you want to grab anything, one of those, you're welcome to. And thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Rick, thank you very much for visiting us and sharing your information with us here today. And thank you all for coming. And if any of you, again, are interested in a franchise, Rick is a huge asset to help get you started. So thank everybody for attending, and hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.